The red warning lights bathed the control room in an eerie glow as David Reed watched the massive alien ship approach their vessel. 3 years of preparation for this moment, and now it felt like everything humanity had worked toward hung in the balance. The Earth's first diplomatic mission to make contact with the galaxy beyond their solar system was about to begin. David had commanded military vessels before, but the UES Harmony was different. Built specifically for this mission, it carried no weapons, only the hopes of an entire species. His crew of 25 represented the best humanity had to offer: scientists, engineers, doctors, and yes, some military personnel. They had trained together for months, learning protocols that might mean nothing to beings they had never met. The alien vessel dwarfed their ship by at least 10 times. Its surface was smooth and silver, with no visible weapons or engines, yet it moved with purpose through the void. When the communication request came through their systems, David felt his heart rate spike. This was it. "Open the channel," he ordered, straightening his uniform. The main screen flickered to life, revealing 2 very different alien beings. The first was tall and slender, with pale blue skin and enormous black eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. The second was shorter but broader, covered in what looked like natural armor plating, with multiple arms and a face that reminded David uncomfortably of Earth's predatory insects. "I am Ambassador Lyran of the Althan Collective," the blue-skinned being spoke, its voice melodic yet somehow translated perfectly into English. "This is War Commander Brex of the Corvan Empire. We represent the Galactic Federation. You are the species from the 3rd planet of this system, correct?" David stepped forward. "I am Captain David Reed of the United Earthship Harmony. We represent humanity, and we're honored to make contact with your Federation." Indeed, Lyran's large eyes seemed to study every detail of David's appearance. "We have been observing your species for some time. Your rapid technological advancement has been noteworthy. We wish to conduct proper assessments before proceeding with formal contact protocols." "Assessments?" David asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Standard procedure." War Commander Breck spoke for the first time, his voice harsh and guttural. "Every species must be properly classified before joining the Federation, for the good of all civilized worlds." What followed was unlike anything David had imagined. The aliens transported over a team of researchers who began what they called biological and psychological evaluation protocols. They measured everything about the human crew: bone density, muscle mass, reaction times, vision capabilities, stress responses. They asked endless questions about human history, society, and behavior patterns. Dr. Sarah Kim, their xenobiologist, was fascinated by the process and tried to ask questions in return, but the aliens politely redirected her attention to their examinations. Engineer Lisa Chang submitted to physical tests that measured her strength and coordination. Sergeant Ben Torres underwent what seemed like combat simulations, though he was told they were merely stress response evaluations. Throughout it all, Ambassador Lyran and War Commander Brex observed with keen interest, making notes on devices David couldn't begin to understand. Their examination took hours, during which the human crew learned almost nothing about their visitors except that they seemed to work together, despite being clearly different species. When the assessments finally concluded, the alien delegation gathered in the Harmony's main conference room. David sat across from them with his senior staff, waiting for what he hoped would be an invitation to join galactic civilization. "Your species presents a fascinating case study," Ambassador Lyran began, his melodic voice taking on what sounded like excitement. "Your evolutionary path is quite unique among sapient species." "In what way?" David asked. War Commander Brex leaned forward, his multiple arms gesturing expressively. "Most species evolve for specific environmental niches. The Althan developed superior cognitive abilities for processing complex information. My people, the Corvan, evolved defensive capabilities and group coordination for survival in hostile environments. The Villani developed sophisticated communication skills for managing large social groups. But humans," Ambassador Lyran continued, "evolved as pursuit predators. Your binocular vision, your dense muscle structure, your cardiovascular efficiency, your psychological resilience to trauma and stress. Everything about your species screams warfare." David felt a chill run down his spine. "We're not just warriors. We're scientists, artists, explorers." "Of course," Lyran nodded sagely. All warfare species develop secondary capabilities, but your primary evolutionary pressure was clearly combat-related. Your ability to track prey, to operate under extreme stress to recover from injury, to make tactical decisions under pressure. These are the hallmarks of a Tier 7 warfare species. A what? Dr. Kim interjected. The Federation classifies all member species according to their primary evolutionary advantages, Brex explained. This ensures each species can contribute most effectively to galactic civilization. Warfare species like yours are highly valued for your unique capabilities. David exchanged glances with his crew. Something about this didn't feel right, but he needed to understand more. What would this classification mean for humanity? Membership in the Federation, of course. Liren smiled, an expression that looked strange on his alien features. Your people would be welcomed as military auxiliaries. We have several conflicts on the rim worlds where human capabilities would be invaluable. Your species would have access to our technology, our trade networks, our knowledge, everything the Federation offers. As soldiers, Ben Torres said quietly. As specialists in your field of expertise, Brex corrected firmly. Just as the Althan handle scientific and administrative matters, and the Vallani manage diplomatic and trade relations, every species contributes according to their evolutionary strengths. Dr. Kim raised her hand tentatively. What if humans wanted to work in science or diplomacy? The two aliens exchanged what might have been surprised looks. That would be inefficient, Liren said carefully. Why would you want to work against your natural capabilities? The Federation has spent millennia perfecting the system of biological specialization. It ensures peace and prosperity for all member worlds. But surely some individuals might have different interests or talents. Aisa Chang pressed. Individual variation exists within species parameters, Brex acknowledged. A particularly intelligent warfare species member might serve as a military strategist or tactical coordinator. But fundamental biological limitations cannot be overcome through desire alone. David felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was humanity's chance to join something greater than themselves, to become part of a galactic community that had achieved peace among the stars. But the price seemed to be accepting a role that reduced all of human potential to a single function. We would need time to discuss this offer with our government, David said finally. Naturally, Liren agreed. We will establish a communication relay so your leaders can contact us directly. Take all the time you need. The Federation has waited this long to add a Tier 7 warfare species to our ranks. We can wait a bit longer. As the alien delegation prepared to return to their ship, David found himself studying their easy cooperation. Despite being completely different species, they worked together seamlessly, each playing their designated role without question or conflict. It was impressive, even admirable. But as he watched War Commander Brex defer automatically to Ambassador Liren on intellectual matters, and saw Liren step back when anything resembling a physical challenge arose, David wondered what humanity would become if they accepted this path. The alien ship departed with promises of future contact, leaving the human crew alone with their thoughts and a decision that would shape the future of their entire species. David stared out at the stars, wondering if joining galactic civilization was worth limiting human potential to a single, violent role. He didn't know that this moment of doubt would soon prove to be the most important instinct of his life. 6 months after first contact, Dr. Sarah Kim found herself in the strangest laboratory she had ever seen. New Geneva Station orbited Earth's moon, hastily constructed as humanity's first Federation outpost. The facility buzzed with activity as humans tried to adapt to their new role in galactic society. But Sarah felt like she was living in a cage made of good intentions. Her official title was Military Biological Advisor, which meant she was supposed to help human soldiers adapt to alien environments. But Sarah had spent her entire career studying life in all its forms, and the restriction to military applications felt like being asked to paint with only one color. Still, she endured it because the alternative was watching humanity remain isolated in their small corner of the galaxy. The Federation had provided her with extensive biological data about their member species, ostensibly to help humans work alongside them in military operations. What Sarah discovered in those files changed everything she thought she knew about galactic civilization. Every species in the Federation was locked into roles based on their evolutionary history. The Althan, with their massive brains that could process information at incredible speeds, handled all scientific research, data analysis, and administrative functions. Their society had no concept of physical labor or manual skills because their bodies were too fragile for such work. The Villani possessed complex vocal structures and natural, empathic abilities that made them perfect negotiators and traders. They managed all diplomatic relations and economic transactions in the Federation, but their psychological makeup made them incapable of handling conflict or making decisions under pressure. The Corvin, like War Commander Brex, had evolved thick carapaces and aggressive instincts that made them natural enforcers. They handled all security, law enforcement, and military leadership roles, but their rigid thinking patterns made them poor at creative problem-solving or adapting to unexpected situations. Each species was convinced this system was not only natural, but optimal. They had achieved peace by eliminating competition between species. Everyone had their role and no one questioned it. It was efficient, stable, and completely alien to everything Sarah understood about human nature. While Sarah studied these files in her laboratory, Sergeant Ben Torres was learning about the Federation's military structure firsthand. His unit had been assigned to patrol duty aboard a Federation vessel, working alongside Corvin enforcement teams in the Outer Rim territories. The mission seemed routine. Investigate a distress signal from a civilian transport near the border zones. Ben's squad consisted of 8 humans, while their Federation partners included 12 Corvin warriors and 3 Althan tactical analysts. The division of labor was clear. Corvin would handle combat operations, Althan would provide strategic analysis, and humans would... Well, nobody seemed quite sure what humans were supposed to do. The transport ship appeared on their sensors, drifting powerless in space with its hull breached in several places. Life sign readings showed survivors aboard, but also indicated the presence of hostile forces. Pirates, most likely, though their ships remained hidden somewhere in the asteroid field nearby. The Corvin immediately began planning a direct assault. Their tactical doctrine was straightforward. Locate the enemy, overwhelm them with superior firepower, secure the transport. The Althan ran probability calculations and determined the optimal approach vectors for minimizing casualties among the rescue force. Ben watched this process with growing frustration. Nobody was talking about the civilians still trapped aboard the damaged transport. Nobody was considering that a direct assault might result in the pirates killing their hostages. Nobody was thinking about the fact that the transport's life support systems were failing, and time was running out. "Excuse me," Ben interrupted the planning session. "What about the people still alive on that ship?" War Leader Korth, the Corvin commander, looked at him with what might have been confusion. "The civilians will be secured once the pirates are eliminated. But if we attack directly, won't the pirates kill them?" "Acceptable risk parameters," replied Senior Analyst Venth, the lead Althan. "Probability calculations show 67% civilian survival rate with direct assault protocols." Ben felt something cold settle in his stomach. These beings were discussing human lives like statistics. What if there's a better way? The Corvin and Althan exchanged glances that clearly communicated their doubt about human military doctrine. But regulations required consultation with all species representatives, so they listened as Ben outlined his plan. Instead of a single approach, Ben suggested a multi-phase operation. His team would infiltrate the asteroid field and identify the pirate vessels, while 2 of his soldiers worked on bypassing the transport's damaged systems to restore life support. Meanwhile, another human would attempt to establish communication with the pirates to negotiate for the civilians' release. "Impossible," War Leader Korth declared. "Combat forces cannot perform technical operations." "Your people lack the cognitive capacity for complex system analysis," Senior Analyst Venth added, not unkindly. "The calculations required for life support restoration are beyond warfare species capabilities." Ben Torres had been a soldier for 15 years, but before that he had been an engineer. Private Martinez had studied communications technology before enlisting. Corporal Chen had worked as a paramedic. Sergeant Williams had taught mathematics at a university. The Federation saw them as warfare specialists, but they were humans first, and humans learned to adapt. What followed challenged everything the Federation understood about biological limitations. Ben's team split into 4 groups, each tackling a different aspect of the crisis. The infiltration team moved through the asteroids with a combination of military stealth techniques and engineering improvisation, using modified equipment to mask their approach. The technical team accessed the transport systems and began repairs that the Althan insisted were impossible without specialized cognitive enhancements. The communication team established contact with the pirates and began negotiations that relied on psychological insights no pure warfare or diplomacy species would have considered. They appealed to the pirates' survival instincts, their economic motivations, and their family connections in ways that bypassed traditional negotiation protocols. Meanwhile, the medical team prepared to treat injured civilians from multiple species, drawing on knowledge that crossed the rigid boundaries between military medicine and civilian healthcare. The operation succeeded completely. The pirates surrendered in exchange for safe passage and a portion of the transport's cargo. The civilians were rescued with 0 casualties. The transport's life support was restored using techniques that the Althan later spent days trying to understand. As they returned to the Federation vessel, Ben noticed the Corvin and Althan crew members watching his team with something that looked like confusion, mixed with awe. They had witnessed humans seamlessly switch between roles that Federation doctrine said were incompatible with their species classification. Back on New Geneva Station, Sarah Kim was reaching similar conclusions from her research. She had been analyzing human performance data compared to other species, and the results were remarkable. Humans didn't excel in any single area the way specialized species did, but they performed competently across all categories. More importantly, they could combine different types of thinking in ways that pure specialists couldn't match. The Federation's biological caste system worked because each species had evolved to fill specific niches. But humans had evolved to be generalists, to adapt to changing circumstances, to combine different approaches as situations demanded. They weren't warfare specialists, they were survival specialists, and warfare was just one of many challenges they had learned to overcome. That night, Sarah sent an encrypted message to Captain Reed on Earth. She had discovered something that could change how the galaxy understood not just humanity, but the entire concept of biological limitation. The Federation's perfect system might not be as perfect as everyone believed. She didn't know that similar messages were being sent by humans throughout Federation space, all reaching the same conclusion. Humanity had been classified according to a system that couldn't account for what they truly were. The question now was whether the galaxy was ready to learn that evolution could create beings who refused to be limited by the role they were born to play. The answer would come sooner than anyone expected, and from the most dangerous source possible. The construction zone stretched across the barren landscape of Ferox Prime like a metallic infection, all straight lines and utilitarian design. Engineer Lisa Chang stood at the edge of the site, watching automated machinery lay the foundation for another military installation, and felt her soul dying a little more each day. She had designed bridges that spanned impossible canyons, created habitats that could sustain life in the harshest environments, and dreamed of building cities among the stars. Instead, she was here building barracks and ammunition depots. Her assignment was simple: oversee the construction of human military facilities on this industrial world. The Federation had been very clear about her role. As a member of a warfare species, her engineering skills were valuable only for military applications. She was forbidden from working on civilian projects, and local regulations prevented her from even suggesting improvements to existing infrastructure. But Lisa Chang had never been good at following rules that made no sense. It started small. The Federation's construction protocols were efficient but wasteful, designed by beings who had never faced resource shortages or emergency situations. Lisa noticed that their building techniques used 40% more materials than necessary and created structures that would fail catastrophically under stress. When she pointed this out to Supervisor Althan Janix, the response was polite but firm. Human warfare adaptations were not applicable to civilian engineering. So Lisa began making mistakes. She ordered the wrong materials, then found ways to use them that happened to reinforce the civilian power grid. She miscalculated foundation depths, creating stronger supports that somehow extended under nearby factories. Her errors in placement positioned military facilities to serve as emergency shelters for civilian populations. The changes were subtle enough that they went unnoticed by Federation inspectors, but the local workers began to whisper among themselves. Production efficiency at the nearby manufacturing plants increased by 15%. Power outages, which had been routine, became rare events. Safety incidents dropped to nearly zero. 2 months into her assignment, Lisa received an unexpected visitor. Supervisor Althan Jennings arrived at her temporary quarters with a data tablet and an expression that might have been curiosity on his alien features. "Engineer Chang," he began in his careful, precise manner. "We have been reviewing the performance data from your construction sites. The results are unusual." Lisa's heart rate spiked, but she kept her voice steady. "In what way?" "Efficiency improvements in surrounding civilian infrastructure have increased by an average of 38%. This was not part of the project parameters." Lisa waited, unsure whether this was an accusation or an observation. "How is this possible?" Jennings continued. "Your species classification indicates capabilities limited to warfare applications. Yet your work appears to have improved systems far outside military parameters." This was the moment Lisa had been both hoping for and dreading. She could lie, make excuses, try to downplay the improvements, or she could tell the truth and risk everything humanity had worked toward. "With respect, Supervisor," she said carefully, "I think there might be a misunderstanding about what warfare actually requires." Over the next hour, Lisa explained how human military engineering differed from the Federation's understanding of warfare. Human soldiers had to operate in any environment, with limited resources under changing conditions. This meant their engineers learned to build things that worked anywhere, lasted under stress, and could be adapted for multiple purposes. "You call it warfare capability," Lisa concluded, "but we call it survival. And survival requires being able to do whatever the situation demands." Jennings was quiet for a long time, processing this information with his superior Althan cognitive abilities. Finally he spoke. "Would you be willing to demonstrate these principles on a larger scale?" What followed was the most challenging and rewarding month of Lisa's career. Working officially within Federation regulations but pushing every boundary she could find, Lisa began redesigning the entire industrial complex. She introduced redundant systems that could function during emergencies, created modular designs that could be rapidly reconfigured for different needs, and implemented safety protocols that protected workers without reducing efficiency. The results were spectacular. Production increased by over 200%. Workplace injuries became virtually non-existent. Energy consumption dropped while output soared. Most importantly, the various species working on Ferox Prime began collaborating in ways that had never been seen before. Lisa's success was noticed throughout Federation space, particularly by other humans who were chafing under similar restrictions. Dr. Michael Santos, officially a combat medic assigned to treat human soldiers, had been quietly revolutionizing medical practices on the border worlds. Michael's breakthrough came during a medical emergency on Kepler 7 when an industrial accident injured workers from 4 different species. The local medical facilities were designed according to Federation protocols, separate treatment centers for each species, staffed by specialists who understood only their own biological type. The problem was that the injuries were severe and time-sensitive. While the Althan doctors calculated optimal treatment protocols and the Villani medical administrators coordinated resource allocation, people were dying. Michael ignored regulations and began treating anyone who needed help. His human medical training had taught him to prioritize based on severity, not species. More importantly, human medicine had developed from treating a single species that exhibited enormous biological diversity. The principles that worked for treating different human genetic variations could be adapted for different alien physiologies. He saved 17 lives that day, including several beings that their own species' doctors had written off as untreatable. When Federation medical officials demanded an explanation, Michael gave them the same answer Lisa had given. Human warfare training had taught them to adapt medical techniques for any situation, any environment, any species. Meanwhile, communication. Specialist Anna Wolf was causing her own revolution on the diplomatic station orbiting Vega Prime. Officially assigned as a military liaison to coordinate between human forces and Federation command, Anna found herself in the middle of a brewing crisis between the Villani and Althan delegations. The dispute was over trade agreements that affected 17 different worlds, and it had been going on for 3 months without resolution. The Villani negotiators were using their species' natural empathic abilities to seek emotional consensus, while the Althan were demanding logical analysis of all possible outcomes. Neither side could understand the other's approach, and both were becoming increasingly frustrated. Anna watched the proceedings for a week before she realized the problem. Both species were trying to negotiate according to their biological strengths, but they were solving completely different problems. The Villani were focused on maintaining relationships, while the Althan were focused on optimizing outcomes. They weren't actually disagreeing, they were having separate conversations. Using techniques that no Federation species had ever considered, Anna began translating not just languages, but entire ways of thinking. She helped the Villani understand that the Althan's logical analysis could strengthen relationships by ensuring fair outcomes. She showed the Althan that the Villani's emotional concerns could improve their logical models by accounting for unpredictable factors. The breakthrough came when Anna suggested a solution that satisfied both species' needs in ways neither had imagined possible. The trade agreement that resulted became a model for interspecies cooperation throughout Federation space. Back on Earth, Captain Reed was receiving reports from humans throughout the galaxy. Each message told the same story. When humans were allowed to work beyond their supposed limitations, they didn't just succeed, they transformed everything around them. But the reports also carried warnings. Some Federation officials were beginning to question whether humanity had been properly classified. Others were doubling down on restrictions, fearing that human adaptability might destabilize their carefully ordered society. The tension came to a head when Sergeant Ben Torres's unit was assigned to investigate a series of mysterious attacks on Federation research stations. The attacks showed a disturbing pattern. They seemed to require impossible combinations of skills to execute. Military precision, scientific knowledge, technological expertise, and diplomatic manipulation, all used together in ways that no single Federation species could manage. Ben's investigation would uncover a truth that would shake the Federation to its core and force them to confront the fatal flaw in their perfect system. But first, he would have to survive what he found in the depths of space, where an old enemy had been waiting patiently for the galaxy to forget the lessons of the past. The human revolution had begun, but the galaxy's greatest test was still to come. The research station hung in space like a broken tooth, its hull torn open and systems dark. Sergeant Ben Torres guided his squad's transport through the debris field, noting the precise nature of the damage. This wasn't random destruction. Someone had known exactly where to hit to disable the station without destroying the valuable research inside. Looks like the same pattern as the other attacks, reported Corporal Williams from the sensor station. Clean breach into the main laboratory. All security systems bypassed, research data stolen, but no unnecessary damage to the facility itself. Ben nodded grimly. This was the 7th research station hit in the past 2 months, and the Federation was no closer to identifying the attackers. The assault showed a level of coordination and expertise that should have been impossible. They required military precision to overcome security systems, scientific knowledge to identify valuable research, technical skills to extract data without damaging equipment, and intelligence-gathering capabilities that surpassed anything in Federation records. "Sir," Private Martinez called from her communications post, "I'm picking up a weak distress beacon from deeper in the station. Someone might still be alive in there." The rescue operation was supposed to be routine. Ben's squad would search for survivors while the Federation team secured the facility and analyzed the damage. But when they docked with the station, Ben immediately knew something was wrong. The airlock showed signs of being bypassed using techniques he had never seen before. The interior of the research station was eerily quiet. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows through corridors that should have been filled with activity. Ben's team moved carefully through the facility, following standard search protocols while their Federation partners began their investigation. It was Private Martinez who found the hidden section. While searching for survivors in what appeared to be a maintenance area, she noticed that the wall scanner readings didn't match the visual layout. A careful examination revealed a concealed entrance that had been opened and then resealed so expertly that even the station's own crew might not have known it existed. "Ben, you need to see this," Martinez whispered over the comm. The hidden area contained the most advanced research facility Ben had ever seen. Banks of computers processed data at incredible speeds, while laboratory equipment that seemed decades ahead of current Federation technology lined the walls. But what made Ben's blood run cold were the historical records displayed on the main screen. Images of battles that had taken place 800 years ago filled the monitors. Ships locked in combat, worlds burning, populations fleeing across entire star systems. And in the center of it all were beings that looked disturbingly familiar, humanoid in shape but clearly alien, fighting with a combination of tactical brilliance and technological mastery that had nearly destroyed the galaxy. The Devourers, Ben breathed, reading the text that accompanied the images. Dr. Sarah Kim's voice crackled through his comm system, from where she was analyzing data in another part of the station. Ben, I'm finding records here about something called the Great War. It says the Federation barely survived a conflict with a species that could... Oh no, what is it, Sarah? They called them Devourers because they consumed knowledge. But not just information. They absorbed the capabilities of other species. They could fight like Corvin, think like Althan, negotiate like Villani, and engineer like... Sarah's voice trailed off. Like humans, Ben finished. The pieces began falling into place with terrifying clarity. The Federation's rigid biological caste system hadn't evolved naturally. It had been created as a defense mechanism. After barely surviving the Devourer War, they had deliberately specialized their species to make sure no one could ever again combine multiple capabilities the way their enemies had. Ben was studying the combat records when he heard Martinez gasp over the comm. Sir, these aren't historical files. The timestamps show recent activity. Someone has been using this facility within the past week. The realization hit Ben like a physical blow. The Devourers weren't extinct. They had been hiding, learning, preparing. And now they were back, using the very research stations that had been created to defend against them to gather intelligence about current Federation capabilities. All teams, extract immediately, Ben ordered, but it was already too late. The attack came from multiple directions simultaneously. Energy weapons fired from positions that should have been impossible to reach. Security systems that had been offline suddenly activated under enemy control. Blast doors sealed sections of the station, separating Ben's team from their Federation partners. But what made the assault truly terrifying was its intelligence. The attackers seemed to know exactly how each species would react. They used Corvin tactical patterns against the Federation security team while simultaneously employing Althan analytical methods to predict Ben's squad's responses. Ben found himself fighting an enemy that anticipated his every move, countered his tactics before he could implement them, and adapted to his changes faster than should have been possible. It was like fighting a mirror version of humanity, but one that had been perfected over centuries of study and preparation. The battle raged through the station's corridors for what felt like hours. Ben's team used every trick they had learned, combining military training with engineering improvisation, medical knowledge, and communication skills. For the first time since joining the Federation, they fought as humans rather than as warfare specialists. It was barely enough. They managed to reach the escape pods just as the hidden sections of the station began self-destructing, erasing the evidence of the Devourer's presence. But not before Ben caught a glimpse of their enemies, beings that looked almost human but moved with an alien grace, their eyes holding an intelligence that seemed to encompass everything the galaxy had to offer. Back at Federation headquarters, the emergency council session that followed Ben's report was unlike anything in galactic history. For the first time in 8 centuries, representatives from every member species gathered to discuss an existential threat to their civilization. Ambassador Liren's melodic voice was strained as he addressed the assembly. The evidence is undeniable. The Devourers have returned, and they have been using our own research facilities to study our current capabilities. War Commander Brex pounded the table with one of his armored fists. Our ancestors defeated them once. We can do so again. At what cost? Asked senior diplomat Nth of the Villani. The Great War nearly destroyed galactic civilization. Our populations have not recovered even after 8 centuries. Dr. Sarah Kim, granted special permission to address the council despite her species classification, stood to present her analysis. The problem is that our defensive strategies haven't changed. But they have. The Federation's specialization system worked against the original Devourers because it made us unpredictable to them. But now they've had centuries to study us. What do you mean? Lyran asked. They know exactly how each species will respond to any given situation. Corvin will use direct military action. Althan will seek analytical solutions. Filani will attempt diplomatic resolutions. Our specialization has made us predictable. The council fell silent as the implications sank in. Their greatest strength had become their greatest weakness. There is another problem, Sarah continued. The historical records show that the Federation barely won the first war through overwhelming numbers and sacrifice. But the galaxy is more specialized now than it was then. We've actually become less capable of fighting an adaptable enemy. War Commander Brex's voice was grim. Then we are facing an enemy we cannot defeat. Captain Reed, who had been listening from Earth via communication link, spoke for the first time. Not necessarily. You're forgetting something important. What? Lyran asked. You have us now. Humanity. The silence that followed was deafening. Every being in the council chamber understood what Reed was implying. The Federation had restricted humanity because they reminded everyone of the Devourers. But now that similarity might be their only hope for survival. You want us to unleash another warfare species against the Devourers? Brex asked. No, Reed replied. We want you to unleash humanity. Not as warriors, not as specialists, but as what we really are. Beings who refuse to be limited by what we were evolved for. The debate that followed would determine the fate of galactic civilization. Some council members argued for maintaining restrictions, fearing that unleashing human adaptability might save them from the Devourers, but destabilize their entire society. Others believed the risk was worth taking. The decision came when long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures approaching from dark space. The Devourer fleet was larger than anything in the historical records, and it was heading directly for the Federation's core worlds. The galaxy would soon learn whether evolution had created humanity to be warriors, or whether warfare had simply been one of many crucibles that forged something far more dangerous. Beings who could become anything the situation required. The final test was coming, and this time, there would be no second chances. The emergency order came through every Federation communication channel simultaneously, transmitted in the languages of all member species, and marked with the highest priority codes. For the first time in galactic history, all restrictions on a member species were being lifted due to extreme threat conditions. Humanity was no longer limited to military roles. Dr. Sarah Kim read the order 3 times before she believed it. After months of frustration, fighting to use her skills within artificial boundaries, she was finally free to work directly with the Althan research teams on developing defenses against the Devourer threat. She should have felt triumphant. But the massive enemy fleet approaching the core worlds made celebration impossible. Her first collaboration session with the Althan scientists was unlike anything she had experienced. Senior researcher Quenth had spent decades studying the historical records of the Great War, analyzing every battle, every tactic, every failure of the ancient Federation forces. His vast mind could process information at speeds that humans could barely comprehend, but he had been trapped by the same analytical methods for centuries. The mathematical models are clear, Quenth explained as holographic battle displays filled the laboratory. Every simulation shows the same result. Our specialized forces cannot adapt quickly enough to counter Devourer tactics. They learn our patterns too quickly. Sarah studied the data, seeing it not through the lens of pure analysis but through human experience of improvisation and adaptation. What if we stopped trying to be unpredictable through complexity and instead embraced simplicity? I do not understand. Your people think the answer is to calculate more variables, but what if we reduce them instead? What if we created units that could change their entire approach in minutes, rather than trying to predict every possible scenario? What followed was the most intense research collaboration in galactic history. Sarah introduced Quenth to human concepts of peer review and hypothesis testing that revolutionized how the Althan approached problems. Instead of one brilliant mind calculating all possibilities, teams of researchers tested ideas rapidly, building on each other's successes and learning from failures. The breakthrough came when they realized the Federation had been fighting the last war. The Devourers had evolved beyond their original capabilities, but so could the Federation's defenders. Sarah's team began developing adaptive tactical systems that could be reconfigured during battle, guided not by predetermined algorithms but by real-time human judgment, combined with Althan processing power. Meanwhile, engineer Lisa Chang found herself at the center of the most ambitious construction project in Federation history. The emergency had transformed her from a restricted military engineer into the coordinator of defensive preparations across 17 star systems. Working with Althan designers and Corvin construction crews, she was retrofitting entire fleets with adaptive systems that could change function during combat. The key innovation was modularity, taken to its logical extreme. Instead of ships designed for specific roles, Lisa created vessels that could reconfigure themselves from exploration craft to combat ships to rescue transports as the situation demanded. The engineering challenges were staggering, but her human experience with resource constraints and emergency repairs provided solutions that pure specialists had never considered. "This is impossible," declared Master Builder Horth of the Corvin Construction Guild, examining Lisa's designs for the 10th time. "These systems require too many compromises. They cannot be optimized for any single function." "That's exactly the point," Lisa replied. "We're not trying to be the best at one thing. We're trying to be good enough at everything." The concept violated every principle of Federation engineering, which had always emphasized perfection within narrow parameters. But as the Devourer fleet drew closer to the outer systems, impossible began to look like their only hope. Dr. Michael Santos was revolutionizing medical practices on an equally dramatic scale. The emergency had granted him access to medical facilities throughout Federation space, and he immediately began training mixed-species medical teams. His human background in treating diverse populations became the foundation for the first truly integrated healthcare system the galaxy had ever seen. The traditional Federation approach required injured Corvin to be treated by Corvin specialists, wounded Althan by Althan doctors, and so on. But the coming war would create casualties faster than any single species could handle. Michael's crash course in interspecies medicine broke down barriers that had existed for millennia. "The basic principles are the same," he explained to a mixed group of medical professionals from 6 different worlds. "Pain, injury, healing, these are universal experiences. Yes, each species has unique physiology, but trauma response follows predictable patterns if you know what to look for." The training was intense and sometimes chaotic. Althan doctors struggled to make intuitive leaps that human medicine required. Filani healers had to learn to work with species they couldn't empathically connect with. Corvin medics had to develop the gentle touch that delicate procedures required. But gradually, something unprecedented emerged. Medical teams that could treat anyone, anywhere, under any conditions. When the first skirmishes with Devourer scout forces began in the Rim territories, these integrated units achieved casualty survival rates that seemed impossible. Communications specialist Anna Wolf faced perhaps the greatest challenge of all. The approaching war required unprecedented cooperation between Federation species, but centuries of biological segregation had created communication barriers that went far deeper than language. Different species literally thought in different ways, and the emergency demanded they work together seamlessly. Anna found herself appointed as the first interspecies coordination specialist, a position that had never existed because it had never been needed. Her job was to help the various military commands understand each other well enough to fight as a unified force. The first joint planning session was a disaster. Corvin military leaders wanted immediate aggressive action. Althan strategists demanded comprehensive analysis of all variables before proceeding. Filani coordinators insisted on maintaining communication with all affected populations. Each species was convinced their approach was correct, and none could understand why the others couldn't see the obvious solution. Anna watched the increasingly heated debate with growing recognition. She had seen this pattern before in human military history, when different branches of Earth's armed forces had struggled to coordinate during joint operations. The solution wasn't to make everyone think the same way. It was to make everyone understand that different approaches could work together. "You're all right," Anna interrupted the argument, causing startled silence throughout the command center. "Commander Brex, immediate action is necessary to prevent civilian casualties." Analyst Quenth, comprehensive planning is essential for resource allocation. Coordinator Nth, population communication will maintain morale and prevent panic. but you're solving different parts of the same problem. What Anna created over the following weeks became known as the integration protocol. Instead of trying to blend different species approaches into a single strategy, she developed systems that allowed each species to contribute their strengths while understanding how those contributions fit into the larger plan. Corvin units provided rapid response capabilities while Althan teams handled logistics and planning. Valani coordinators managed civilian relations and intelligence gathering, while human teams served as bridges, translating between different ways of thinking and adapting plans as circumstances changed. The first major test came at the Threshold system, where the Devourer main fleet finally engaged Federation forces. The battle was unlike anything in galactic history, not because of its scale, but because of how it was fought. Traditional Federation tactics failed completely within the first hour. The Devourers had studied 8 centuries of Federation military doctrine and could counter every standard maneuver almost before it began. Corvin assault formations were scattered by attacks that anticipated their movements. Althan's strategic plans were disrupted by tactics that shouldn't have been possible to predict, but then the human integrated units entered the battle, and everything changed. Sergeant Ben Torres commanded a mixed squadron that included human, Corvin, Althan, and Valani crew members. Instead of following predetermined battle plans, they adapted continuously, switching roles and tactics faster than the Devourers could analyze and counter. In one engagement, Ben's ship approached as a research vessel, using Althan's scanning protocols to analyze enemy defenses. When the Devourers adjusted to this apparent scientific survey, the ship suddenly reconfigured as a combat unit, with Corvin weapon systems coming online. As the enemy responded to this military threat, Valani communications specialists established contact with other Federation units, coordinating a complex maneuver that no single species could have managed alone. The most remarkable moment came when Ben's ship was heavily damaged and appeared to be retreating. The Devourers moved to pursue, following patterns they had observed in previous battles. Instead, the damaged vessel became a rescue ship, using medical protocols to evacuate casualties from other Federation vessels, while Lisa Chang's adaptive engineering systems rerouted power for an escape that looked like cowardice but was actually a tactical withdrawal. By the time the Devourers realized they were fighting an enemy that could be a research vessel, combat ship, rescue craft, and diplomatic platform simultaneously, their analytical advantage had evaporated. They were facing opponents who refused to stay in the categories that made them predictable. The battle raged for 3 days with neither side able to achieve decisive victory, but something fundamental had changed. For the first time in 8 centuries, Federation forces were holding their own against the Devourers. More importantly, they were learning and adapting faster than their enemies could adjust. As the Devourer fleet finally withdrew to regroup, Captain Reed received reports from across the battle zone. Human integrated units had performed beyond all expectations, but more significantly, other Federation species were beginning to adopt human approaches to flexibility and adaptation. Young Althan researchers were learning to make intuitive leaps between logical conclusions. Corvin warriors were developing tactical creativity that went beyond their traditional aggression. Valani negotiators were finding ways to communicate across species barriers that had seemed impossible to bridge. The rigid biological caste system that had defined Federation civilization for millennia was beginning to crack, not through force or revolution, but through the simple demonstration that there were other ways to be. But the war was far from over. The Devourers had withdrawn to analyze these new tactics, and they would return with countermeasures. The question now was whether the Federation could continue evolving faster than their ancient enemy could adapt, or whether this brief victory was simply delaying an inevitable defeat. The answer would determine not just the survival of galactic civilization, but what that civilization would become if it survived. 8 months had passed since the Battle of Threshold system, and the galaxy felt different. Captain David Reed walked through the corridors of Unity Station, the first truly integrated facility in Federation space, watching beings from dozens of species work together in ways that would have been impossible just a year earlier. Young Althan researchers collaborated with Corvin engineers on projects that required both analytical brilliance and practical innovation. Villani negotiators learned tactical planning from human advisors while teaching empathic communication techniques in return. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it certainly hadn't been easy. The Devourer War had forced change upon the Federation, but what emerged from that crisis was something entirely new, a galactic civilization, based not on biological limitations but on collaborative potential. The turning point had come not through military victory, but through an approach that no one had expected. 3 months after the Threshold battle, as both sides prepared for what many believed would be the final, devastating conflict, humanity had proposed the impossible, peace negotiations with the Devourers. The reaction from the Federation Council had been immediate and intense. "You cannot negotiate with beings who seek to devour all knowledge and capability," War Commander Brex had declared, his armored form rigid with outrage. Ambassador Liren had been more diplomatic but equally skeptical. "The historical records are clear. The Devourers recognize no authority but their own superiority. They cannot be reasoned with." But Captain Reed had stood before the assembled representatives and made an argument that changed everything. "What if we've been wrong about what they want? What if the problem isn't that they're evil, but that they're exactly like us?" The negotiations that followed were the most complex diplomatic undertaking in galactic history. Led by Anna Wolf and a team of human communication specialists working with the most skilled Villani negotiators, the effort required months of careful contact with Devourer representatives, who had spent centuries learning to mimic other species perfectly. The breakthrough came when the human team realized that the Devourers weren't trying to destroy Federation civilization. They were trying to join it. For 800 years, they had been locked out of galactic society, branded as monsters, forced to survive by taking what they needed, rather than being allowed to contribute what they could offer. Like humanity, the Devourers had evolved as generalists, capable of adapting to any situation. But unlike humanity, they had been met with fear and violence instead of cautious acceptance. The Great War had been as much a product of mutual misunderstanding as genuine conflict. The peace treaty that emerged from these negotiations was revolutionary. The Devourers were granted uninhabited systems on the galactic rim where they could develop their own society without threatening established populations. In return, they would share their accumulated knowledge and cease all hostile activities against Federation worlds. But the real revolution was what the treaty represented: the acknowledgement that the galaxy was large enough for multiple approaches to existence, and that diversity of thought and capability was a strength rather than a threat. Dr. Sarah Kim found herself at the center of this transformation as director of the first Interspecies Academy. The facility on Unity Station brought together the brightest minds from every member species, including recent Devourer additions, to study and learn from each other's approaches to science and discovery. "The interesting thing," Sarah explained to a group of visiting Federation officials, "is that we're not creating hybrid beings or trying to make everyone the same. We're teaching individuals to understand and work with different kinds of minds." She gestured to a laboratory where a young Althan researcher was working alongside a Devourer scientist and a human engineer. "Analyst Venth there still thinks like an Althan. His cognitive processing is still faster and more precise than any other species can match. But now he also understands how Devourer intuitive leaps can shortcut logical processes, and how human practical experience can ground theoretical work in reality." The Academy had produced breakthroughs that none of the species could have achieved alone. Medical treatments that combined Althan precision with Villani empathic healing and human adaptability. Engineering solutions that merged Corvin durability with Devourer innovation and human resourcefulness. Diplomatic protocols that brought together every species' communication strengths. Engineer Lisa Chang had taken the principles she developed during the war and applied them to peacetime construction. Her latest project, a space habitat designed to house multiple species comfortably, incorporated adaptive technologies that could adjust living conditions for any resident. The structure could reconfigure itself as needed, growing and changing as its population evolved. The old Federation approach would have required separate facilities for each species, Lisa explained to a group of construction specialists from across the galaxy. This habitat learns from its inhabitants and adapts to serve their needs. It's not optimized for any single group, but it works well for everyone. The project had attracted attention from worlds throughout Federation space. Planets that had struggled with multi-species populations for centuries were requesting similar adaptive infrastructure. The rigid specialization that had once seemed so efficient was giving way to flexible systems that could serve diverse needs. Dr. Michael Santos had achieved perhaps the most dramatic transformation of all. His integrated medical approach had evolved into a galactic healthcare system that treated individuals rather than species categories. Medical centers throughout Federation space now employed mixed teams that could respond to any emergency involving any combination of species. We've stopped thinking about Corvin medicine or Althan medicine, Michael explained during a medical conference on Unity Station. We practice life medicine, understanding that while each species has unique biology, the fundamental processes of injury, healing, and recovery are universal. The system had saved thousands of lives during the recent crisis when a plague struck the Kepler colonies. The disease affected multiple species differently, and traditional segregated medicine would have been helpless. But integrated medical teams could track the plague's progression across species lines and develop treatments that worked for everyone. Communication specialist Anna Wolf had perhaps the most complex role in the new Federation. As the first director of interspecies coordination, she oversaw programs that helped different species work together effectively. Her integration protocol had evolved from a wartime necessity into a fundamental part of how galactic civilization operated. The goal was never to make everyone think the same way, Anna explained to a gathering of diplomatic trainees. It's to help everyone understand how their thinking fits with others. A Corvin warrior can still be aggressive and direct, but now they understand how that directness supports Althan planning and Villani relationship building. The success of integration programs had led to requests from worlds that had never considered multi-species cooperation. Planets that had been isolated by their inability to relate to other Federation species were joining collaborative projects for the first time. Sergeant Ben Torres had transitioned from military service to become an instructor at the new Tactical Academy, where beings from all species learned to work together in crisis situations. His classes combined combat training with engineering problem-solving, medical response, and diplomatic de-escalation. The point isn't to turn everyone into human-style generalists, Ben explained to his mixed species class. It's to help everyone understand that they can do more than they think they can. A Corvin student might discover they're good at detailed analysis. An Althan might find they can handle physical challenges. A Villani might learn they can make tough decisions under pressure. The Academy had become a model for educational institutions throughout the galaxy. Instead of species-segregated learning that reinforced biological limitations, schools began offering programs that encouraged individuals to explore capabilities beyond their evolutionary heritage. But perhaps the most significant change was the simplest one. Throughout Federation space, beings from different species were choosing to live and work together not because regulations required it, but because they discovered they accomplished more together than apart. Captain Reed often walked through Unity Station's common areas, watching Althan children play with young Corvin, while Villani adults shared meals with devourer families and human couples. The rigid caste system that had defined galactic civilization for millennia had given way to something more complex and more beautiful. A society where individuals were valued for their contributions rather than their biological categories. The Federation Council had officially recognized these changes 6 months earlier, amending the founding charter to eliminate species-based role restrictions. Any being could now pursue any career, participate in any field, contribute in any way their abilities allowed. We have learned, Ambassador Liren had announced during the historic session, that evolution is not a prison but a foundation. Each species brings unique strengths to our civilization, but those strengths become most powerful when they are shared rather than segregated. The new Federation faced challenges that the old system had never imagined. Integrating different approaches to everything from art to science to governance required constant negotiation and adaptation. Some worlds struggled with the transition, preferring the certainty of traditional roles to the complexity of unlimited possibility. But the benefits far outweighed the difficulties. Scientific breakthroughs accelerated as different species research methods combined in unexpected ways. Economic growth surged as beings could contribute their talents wherever they were most needed. Cultural exchange flourished as species barriers dissolved. Most importantly, the galaxy had proven itself capable of evolving beyond the circumstances of its birth. The Federation had been forged in the aftermath of the Great War, designed to prevent another conflict like the one that had nearly destroyed civilization. But it had grown beyond its defensive origins to become something greater, a civilization that celebrated diversity while building unity. Standing on Unity Station's observation deck, looking out at stars that now represented not separate species territories, but shared worlds of infinite possibility, Captain Reed reflected on humanity's journey from Earth to the galaxy. They had been classified as a warfare species, limited to roles that seemed to define their nature, but they had proven that being forged by war didn't mean being limited to war. Their adaptability, born from countless challenges and conflicts, had taught them that no being needs to be confined by what they were born to be. They could become whatever the situation required, whatever their dreams demanded, whatever their galaxy needed. The stars held endless possibilities, and for the first time in galactic history, every being was free to explore them all.